Hey guys, it's Heather with Running with Scissors, and this month we are doing the tutorial for the June subscription box, which is box number 20. And you saw in the opening the picture, the finished product of what you are going to be making today. So let's get to it and let's see what's in the box. So this month you're going to have a small box and then a loose board unless the project was shipped to you, and in that case it comes all in one box. But this is an 18-inch pine board. It's about 5 1/4 inches wide, and then your supply box contains the video tutorial link, and this is an old one so this isn't it, but in your box it will be correct. And it was brought to my attention that not everybody knew what this was. And what you do is you just take your smartphone camera and you can scan this QR code and it takes you right to the video. Of course, the videos are always posted in the It's in the Box VIP group, and they're usually in a comment of the album of the month. Okay, so that's how you find them. Go to the comment. There's no other way for us to put them in there other than in a comment. Okay, so in your box this month you have a lot of little things, but let's get to it. First, you have the letters H, M, and E. And the little sunflower you saw in the opening is the O. So to create the sunflower, we're using a series of stencils. Now, mine are handwritten, but on yours there will be stickers. And the sticker will say 1, paint white, 2, paint red, and 3, paint blue, with little arrows indicating the direction that the stencil goes on the substrate, on the wood backer, okay? So the numbers indicate the order that you use them. So we're going to first use the whole sunflower, and we're going to paint it white. And then second, we're going to paint red, and third, we're going to paint blue. Now you have a large cup of gray paint, a small cup of black paint, and then you have little paint pods of red, white, and blue. You have some wedges and a sponge. You have a tiny tube of super glue. You have a safety pin for weeding. You have some sandpaper that you're going to use to sand before you put your stencil on. And of course you have a plastic card, which acts as a squeegee. Okay, so let's set all this stuff aside. And you'll have instructions as well. Of course, I never have instructions in the tutorial video because first I do the tutorial and then I write the instructions so I know that I followed all the steps and don't miss anything on the instructions. You should have handy a ruler and a pencil, a Phillips screwdriver, and then of course baby wipes and scissors are always nice to have handy just in case you need them. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to paint our backer board with our gray paint using the soft side of our yellow sponge. So I'm just going to dip my sponge into my gray paint. You could also dump your paint out onto a box or your table cover, or you could actually put it right on the substrate if you want. Just don't put too much on there because you need to be able to spread it all around. And of course we're going to paint a very light coat because we want to make sure that our stencil adheres properly. And if we get our paint too thick, it doesn't dry on the undercoat, the underside of it, just the top layer dries. And then it creates a problem with our stencil. So you can see I'm just doing a very thin coat. You want to make sure you get the edges. Now when you do the sawn edges, not the side, this side goes through the mill and it's nice. However, this end is the circular saw end, the short end. And so sometimes you have to push the paint in there with your sponge because the grain is so thick on that, so deep. And that's because we cut these boards down to size using our miter saws. so there's my first coat. And we're gonna let that dry, and then we're gonna put a second coat on it. And I want you to see how thin I'm putting my paint on, that I can see the grain of wood through my paint. We want it that thin on purpose, right? We wanna make sure that our coat is thin so that it dries fully, and we can put a second coat on it in just a second. But during the videos, I always multitask to get things done a little bit quicker, so you're not watching a video for hours on end. So while we wait for that first coat of the gray backer board to dry, I'm gonna start painting my letters. And to paint my letters, I'm going to use my black paint, and I'm gonna use my full-size wedge. I'm gonna dip my wedge into my black paint, and I'm gonna dab off on the side. I don't need a ton of paint on my wedge, but I'm pouncing over here, and I'm just working that paint up through that wedge. And then I'm gonna bring over to my letters, and I'm just gonna pounce it onto my letters. Refill your sponge when you need to. Just remember, you don't want a pool of paint on your letters. Just a nice thin coat. You'll give these 2 to 3 coats. I think we can get coverage in just 2 coats. But a nice thin coat will dry very quickly, and you'll be able to go back and put on your second coat pretty much by the time that you're done putting your first coat on all 3 pieces. Okay, I have my first coat on all 3 of my pieces. Now you can tell when you're ready for your second coat when your letters are no longer shiny and they have just like a flat matte finish to them. They're kind of dull. The paint is kind of dull looking when it's held up to the light. And I can see that my M is nearly all dull. My H is very well on its way, and my E is halfway there as well. So I'm going to start with a second coat on my letters. Now, if you start putting a second coat on before your first coat is dry, you may notice that you pull up your semi-dry paint from the first coat, and then it will make a splotchy look. What you're doing is you're picking up just small bits of dried paint, and then you're pressing them back down in probably a different area, and it just looks splotchy. So it's important that you let it dry all the way. If you're impatient, you can use a hair dryer. We have hair dryers in our studio that we use quite frequently to dry projects before in between coats, you know, so we can get the first coat dry pretty quickly before moving on to the second. So you can always use a hair dryer. Okay, I think that's going to be it for our letters. I don't think that they need a third coat, so we're going to call it good on that second coat there. And I'm going to move these off to the side and let them dry the remaining time that they need. And I'm going to pull my backer board back, and I'm going to give it a second coat. And I believe a second coat will be perfect for this as well. And so we are going to let that dry the remainder of the way. And then we'll be back in just a few minutes to finish this project up. Okay, we're back. Our second coat is dry. So now I'm going to take our sandpaper square that you have in your kit. I'm just going to lightly sand this. Now, we don't want to sand it so heavy or so hard that we scrape the paint off, but we just want to sand it just a little bit to smooth down, knock down that paint. Now, if you find that you sanded just a little bit too hard and you took some paint off the edges that you didn't want to take off, you can just run your sponge back over top of them real quick. Or maybe you'll like that look. It gives it a bit of a distressed look. And so you can leave it like that as well. So that little bit of sand just knocks that paint down just a little bit so that the stencil will stick to it. Now, before we put our stencil on, we want to make sure that we have it in the right place, which means we're going to have to position our letters on our board for a hot second. And your letters might not be completely dry, so just be careful or wait until they are dry. So you're just going to want to place your letters like this and move them around, up, down, till you get the placement that you want, just to make sure that your sunflower is where they're going to be. Because you're going to take these letters off while you paint your sunflower, and then you can come back and put them back on. But I know this is probably about the spot where I'm going to put my sunflower. So I'm just going to remove my M and my E. I'm going to leave my H there just for reference while I put my sunflower stencil in place. So I'm going to take my sunflower stencil. Now remember, we're using the one that is marked 1, and it's also marked paint white. And I'm going to take my plastic card, and I'm just going to squeegee that all down just to make sure that the transfer tape is sticking completely to it. And then I'm going to peel the backing paper away, making sure that all the blue is staying down on that clear transfer tape and that none of the blue is on this white backing paper. And then I'm going to place my stencil right about there. And I'm going to take my squeegee and I'm going to squeegee it down to the board. And then I'm going to set my H off to the side and let that dry the rest of the way. And then I'm going to peel that clear application tape off. So I'm going to make sure all the blue stays down to my board. I'm going to start in a corner and I'm just going to drag it away, making sure all the blue stays down, and all I'm pulling off is that clear tape. And then I'm just going to push that to the side. Now, your stencil may not reach all the way to the edges of your board. And if that's the case, you can just take some of that tape that we just peeled off and you can cut little pieces and you can tape it there to the edge, just to cover up so when you're dabbing you don't get paint on the edge of your board. Okay, you could actually put the tape right here as well so you don't get any paint on that part of your board. So let me show you how we would do that. So I'm just going to take my transfer tape and I'm going to cut a strip off of it. And then I'm just going to place it just below the open part of the stencil and then over top of the edge of the board there so I don't get any paint while I'm dabbing accidentally onto my board. Just like this. Now your stencil should fit edge to edge. Mine didn't, but generally we treat the tutorial video as a way to make sure that we correct anything that we had wrong. So by the time you get your box, you should have a stencil that runs edge to edge of your board, but in the chance that it doesn't, you can use this fix. Now boards are milled and they're supposed to be all milled the same size, but over the years we have found that that does not always happen. So it's out of our control, but we have fixes for most things. So we're going to use one of our wedges here. These are all just cut smaller because you don't need them very big. And we are going to paint this whole entire thing with our white paint. So I'm just going to dip my wedge into my pot of paint, and I'm going to pounce over here on my table cover to work that paint up into the wedge and then to get the excess off as well. And then I'm going to come back over to my pot or to my stencil, and I'm going to pounce that white paint over the whole entire open area. Now remember, if you didn't tape off the edges, you're going to want to be careful that you're not getting paint onto your backer board. You just want to stay in the stencil area. You want this to be a very light coat. We don't want heavy paint because, again, stencil, right? And we know that if our paint is too heavy, it will bleed underneath our stencil. You can clean it up with some of your backer board paint. If that happens at the end, we'll see how mine works out. Okay, nice thin coat there. Let it dry, and then we're going to put on a second coat. Now this may need a third coat. Okay, so my first coat is dry. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put on my second coat now. All right, let's let that second coat dry and see if we need a third one. Okay, my second coat is dry, but I do feel like I need a third coat, so I'm just going to go ahead and apply a third coat real quick. All right, there's my third coat, and we're just going to let that dry. Okay, my third coat is dry, so I'm just going to peel my stencil off. Now you are going to want to make sure that your hands are clean, because if you don't have clean hands and you go to peel your stencil off, you could transfer paint from your fingers onto your finished board. And it's not the end of the world, you could touch it up, but if you don't have to, you know, why? So just make sure your hands are clean, and then you can peel your stencil off. So I'm just starting in a corner and peeling back my stencil. See what happens when you don't have clean hands. I got paint on it. Peel back your stencil and peel slowly. Don't just rip it off. It will break apart, of course, because these are just a one-time use, but you just want to gently peel. If you're lucky, you'll peel everything and not have to go back with your pin to peel up pieces of stencil. But you can see that I wasn't lucky. I have a couple spots I have to go back in. And you'll just need your pin, and just open your pin up. You're going to use the sharp edge. And then we just use that to lift up underneath the stencil, and then you can use your fingers to peel the rest of it off. But it just gets underneath the edge of it to lift it. Now if you have very sharp, like medical grade tweezers that have a very pointy end, You can use those as well. We have those in the studio, but of course they don't come in kits. So the pin works just fine. Okay, so now that that's all set and dry, we're ready to put our second stencil on, and that's the one marked number 2, and it's paint red. Now the same thing, we're going to squeegee it down. Okay, make sure I'm in the camera for that. And we're going to make sure that the up arrow is pointed up. Now, the one thing with this next one, and again, make sure all your blue stays down and nothing comes up on the white. We want to make sure that we are lining this up with the edges of the existing sunflower, okay? So you can see I'm gonna move it around until the edges all match, because we are going over top of this with the red paint. Just like that. You'll see the open area of the stencil that you're applying will match up to the white that is already on your board. Now, when your stencils are cut, they are cut to match the width of your board in most cases, so you can use that to help you left and right, but you'll need to eyeball it top to bottom, okay? And eyeballing it or making sure through your stencil left to right is good as well, because like we discussed earlier, not all boards are cut exactly the same. Even though they come out of the mill and should be, they're not. So you'll just want to make sure that all lines up. You're going to squeegee that down, and then you're going to just peel the top application tape, that's the clear stuff. You're going to peel that off, back on itself from a corner, just slowly. And now anything that's white that's left exposed, we are going to paint red. And once again, if you want to, you can mask the edges in the bottom with your leftover application tape that you just pulled off, so you don't get any paint on your backer board. I'm gonna go ahead and put that there because that's pretty close. I'm gonna use another half wedge in my red paint, and I'm gonna do the same exact thing. I'm gonna load up my sponge and unload it. I don't want tons of paint on my substrate, so we're just going to pounce in the open areas only. So that's anything that is showing white. That's the open area of our stencil. All right, we're gonna let this dry, and we're gonna do this same as we did the white. We're gonna let it dry, we're gonna apply a second coat, we're gonna let it dry, we're gonna apply a third coat. Okay, first coat's dry, here goes our second coat. Second coat dry, and now here is our third and final coat. Okay, our third coat's dry, so we're gonna go ahead and remove our stencil, and once again, we're just gonna lift up from a corner. I just used my fingernail, and then we're gonna pull the stencil gently off. And there's our red stripe. Oh, that looks so good. I got lucky that time. All of my stencil pulled up, so I didn't have to go in with my pin. But remember, if you have some stencil that broke apart, you just go back in with your pin. Okay, so now it's time for our third and final stencil. And once again, we're going to squeegee it down. We're going to remove the backing paper, leaving the blue and the clear tape, making sure none of the blue is on the backing paper when we pull it off. And this time we're going to line it up in the upper corner. Now this is going to be pretty close. And just like that, it's lined up. We're going to squeegee it down, and then we're going to tear off the top application tape. And then we're going to use our last half wedge and our blue paint. We're going to soak our sponge, pounce it off, move that paint up into it, and then we are going to just pounce on the open areas of our blue. Now, once again, you could tape off the sides if you need to with your clear tape left over, but on this one I didn't feel the need to do it. I had quite a bit of edge around it. I didn't think I had any risk of getting paint on my backer board. All right, so our first coat, nice and thin, and we're gonna let it dry, and we're gonna come back and do a second and a third coat, just like we did with the first two colors. Our first coat's dry, so we're going to do the second coat. All right, second coat, we're gonna let that dry, and then we'll do our third. All right, our second coat is dry, so let's apply our third and final coat. All right, there's our third and final coat. So we are going to just let that dry, and then we'll finish this project up. All right, our third coat of our blue is dry. So once again, we're just going to gently peel that stencil back. And this one, I am going to have to use my pin because I am not getting it all with one try. Nope, most definitely not. So just use your pen to pick out the rest of the stencil. I'm going to use my tweezers because I have them available. Okay, so there is our, oh my gosh, you guys, it's so cute. I just love it. There is our red, white, and blue sunflower. And so now we're going to position our letters back on. I like to dry fit my letters first because I like to know that I'm placing each one in the spot where I want them before I actually commit to it. So I'm just going to place them all on there like that. And then I am going to tap our glue. So remember, just the cap, our glue is self-tapping. You're just going to screw the red cap onto the glue down tight until it is all the way down, and that taps the glue. And on these disposables, there's no lid. If you have a full size, the red is a lid or a cap, and you have to screw that off to get it flowing. But for these are ready to go. I'm gonna lift my letters up one by one, and I'm just gonna put a little bit of glue on them. I'm making sure that my glue is to the center of my letter, not at the edges, because I don't want it to squish out and get on my backer board. If it squishes out onto my backer board, I cannot cover that up. Now remember, pressure activates super glue. So you just want to press down for a second to get that set. And then you're gonna repeat that with the M and then the H. And then we're gonna do the same thing with the H. All right, and there is your completed project. Now we did include a hanger for you. So it is a D-link or a D-ring hanger. So it's this piece here, and then it has a little tiny screw. And so that's why you needed the screwdriver as part of your supplies or your tools. So let me slide this stuff out of the way, and I will show you how we put this on. Okay, so this is the top. Let's double check that. Yes, that's the H. And it asked you to have a ruler and a pencil. And the reason was so you could get the center of your board. Now these are 5.5-inch boards. So you're going to measure 2 3/4 of an inch. All right, just make a mark with your pencil as long as your pencil works. I had to do a little indent there. And then you are going to take your D-ring, and I'm going to make it kind of low. I don't want this to hang above, but now some people like it like that. For me, I'm going to put it down here. I'm just going to line it up to the center of where I made my mark. And then I'm going to use a screwdriver, and I'm going to push the going to use a screwdriver, and I'm going to push the screw down in just a little bit. Pine is pretty soft, so a screwdriver works just fine. And it only takes a few twists here, and it will be done. And there is our hanger. And then there is our finished project. So cute. This was Melissa's idea this month, and it's fantastic. It did take us a little while to figure out how we were going to get that all to work out for you, but it looks like it worked out just fine. Now, I do want you to see that You can see a little bit of the white edges around the red and the blue, but I think that is perfectly fine. I don't think that's a big deal at all. I think I would probably be the only one that would notice it. From a distance, that won't be noticeable. So, and I don't think even lining your stencil up exactly will ever get totally rid of that. So just do your very best to get that stencil lined up as close as possible. But you still may see just a little bit of that white outside line there. But it looks fantastic. So we hope you enjoyed this month's In the Box. Remember to tell your friends about Running with Scissors and about our monthly craft club, about our monthly DIY kits. All right, guys, thanks so much. Take care.